Welcome to Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape podcast. Hosted by Dr. Holly Krutka, Executive Director of the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. The show highlights SER's role supporting our mission to promote energy-driven economic development for the state of Wyoming.
Welcome back, listeners. Today we're focused on oil and gas once again. In Wyoming, oil and gas is a huge part of our economy. The Petroleum Association of Wyoming members, for example, produce 90% of the state's oil and gas, and that organization estimates that they generate over $5 billion in economic activity and more than 18,000 jobs. So that $5 billion is per year. It's also incredibly important to us here at the School of Energy Resources. We have partners in the industry across the state, and the work of the oil and gas industry and that production really funds our state. It funds our schools. It funds us here at the University of Wyoming and really helps us support our quality of life. So as part of a land-grant institution, the School of Energy Resources, by statute, also is focused on working with states' oil and gas producers. So today, our guest is Tim Fischer. He is the School of Energy Resources Program Manager for Oil and Gas. Welcome, Tim.
Hey, Holly. Thanks for having me.
So let's start by telling listeners about your background and how you came to work here at the School of Energy Resources.
Yeah, how far back do you want me to go? I have a pretty diverse background, but so we won't go all the way back. I came here from working for 12 years at Chevron Corporation in Houston, Texas, where I worked on primarily unconventional reservoirs in both core analysis and petrophysics. I came to work at SER because I saw the advertisement for the job and Nice. It really appealed to me. And I said, hey, that's a place I want to work. I think that would be a neat place to work and work in Wyoming and live there. So.
Well, tell us about how working like in industry, I mean, you have some of the same topics. How is that different from being here at the School of Energy Resources?
So industry tends to be very focused on the next, and by next I mean the thing that's happening next week, right? They're very focused on where they're drilling now, where they are producing from next. What do we need to make money in the near term, right? They're always looking at how can we improve, the quarterly earnings for our investors. That doesn't mean that they aren't looking farther afield. Most companies do have exploration teams that will look at the next play that they want to start developing, but they're more near-term focused. Whereas at the university, you can be near-term focused, and we have projects that are near-term focused. But you also have that opportunity to say, hey, 10 years from now, what do we think it's going to look like, and what can we do to start researching that next thing that's going to be either a game changer or just incrementally improve production.
And so you've assessed oil and gas plays all over the world. How does what you've seen before compare to what we have in Wyoming? Yeah,
so I don't want to talk specifically about the different types of rock, except to say that everything is different. Even looking at your traditional sandstone reservoir, they all have different challenges that you have to face. You might have similar rock, but different depths. You might have different pathways that those rocks have been sourced. In the unconventional world, it's even more so. There's different thermal maturities that you have to worry about as far as the organic matter. Is it a source rock? Is it a self-sourcing reservoir? What's the pore structure look like? So coming to Wyoming and looking at the Wyoming rocks, yeah, they're different than anywhere else. And that's the main thing. You have to have the tool set built to be able to investigate whatever the type of rock you're looking at. And so that comes from both a exploration standpoint, where you're looking at the structure, the stratigraphy, and the seismic, all the way down to how you're going to produce it. You face different challenges, but their toolbox tends to be more or less the same. So as long as you have that toolbox mastered, I think you can start to really investigate the rock itself and determine what the unique thing about that play is going to be.
Right. And we'll get into some of the specific projects you're working on here at SER, and then kind of what you're just coordinating efforts across the university. But before we do that, I think we're really fortunate here at SER and really at the University of Wyoming being the only four-year research institution and being a land grant research institution that we have such close connections with industry. And so our students get to work on kind of real projects. They get to go see real energy production sites, and really not for just oil and gas, but for all kinds of energy in the state. So can you talk about some of the folks that you've met with already in your time here who are making impacts within the industry?
Yeah. So the part of the problem when you start talking about, you start naming names, then you eventually forget names.
Oh, I know.
So I'm not gonna talk about any specific names.
Okay, probably smart.
I mean, but what's great about the people who work in Wyoming is that they all know the rock really well, and a lot of people are from Wyoming and work in Wyoming, and so everybody I've worked with, both from the industry to the people at PAW, the Wyoming State Geological Survey, EORI, and our faculty here, they all have a wealth of knowledge. And me not being from Wyoming and not a native, it's really helpful to be able to reach out to those people and get their knowledge. I will mention two people, Fred McLaughlin and Scott Quillinan, who, my supervisor and the senior director here at SER, they've lived in the state, they've mapped the state, they know the state so well that anytime I have a question, I can just go and talk to them. And so it's really helpful to have there. So I won't mention them. But,
it's incredible. They do.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, and this, we're kind of focused on the layperson here. So what does it mean to know the rock? Like, talk about what does that really mean? Like, people here really know the rock. Like, they don't understand the geology in other states as well. Like, talk about that a little more. Yeah.
Okay. So knowing the rock to me is having enough experience either seeing, there's two things, right? There's the rock itself. When you put it in your hand, how does it feel? Does it break apart when you're holding it, or does it stay together really well? And then there's measurements on the rock. And so the ability to see the rock and hold it in your hand and know, okay, this is how this rock kind of feels. This is how it kind of breaks apart. This is what it looks like. Sometimes this is what it tastes like. I'm an old school geologist, so I still will put some, shale in my mouth and chew it up a little bit and see what it is. Yeah, I don't do that in places where there's a lot of arsenic.
Right. Good idea.
So, yep. And then there's the measurements that you make on the rock. So what's neat is to be able to tie that kind of the way the rock looks and feels to the actual measurements that it makes and correlating those. So if you go take the Weber quartzite, for example, it's this really hard rock. You can, it's hard to break even with a hammer versus something like the Mowry Shale that breaks apart, it's still a hard rock, but it shatters, it breaks easily. And then to see the differences in the measurements that you make, right? You can tell the difference between them petrophysically if you're looking at a downhole log, or even from the lab if you're doing some sort of hardness measurement or something like that. And so that's what I mean when I say know the rock. Right? Yeah.
It's always fun to hear geologists talk about rocks. We think so too. Yeah, you have a whole other level.
And then there's another level, just being able to, as you're driving, down the road and saying, hey, that's this formation. And then everybody else in the car is like, oh, no, we don't care. But yeah.
That was me. Yeah. Driving across the state a few times from Laramie up through to Jackson, and you go the Du Bois route, and there is a lot of different terrain and a lot of different structures. Yeah. And I've actually been driving with Scott and Fred before, and man, there was a lot of information that was given that I probably didn't retain that much of about where the different rocks were from. But yeah, they never give up on me.
Well, as a teacher, you can also use that, right? I mean, you can use that to say, oh, here's this rock and here's that rock. And then you go to a different part of the state and you say, hey, these are these same rocks. And look, they have the same orientation or they have a different orientation. And that's because, you had this laramide orogeny or whatever, that came up and built these mountains. And
actually don't know. Laramide, say it again.
So the laramide orogeny.
Okay.
So it was one of the largest mountain building events.
Oh.
I would say the dates, but I'll get them a little bit wrong, and then the people who care about the dates exactly will get mad at me. But it was one of the big mountain building events that all the basins and mountains here in Wyoming are from the Laramide orogeny, and it's named after the town of Laramie, as a matter of fact.
Oh, so. Yeah. You know what's funny is sometimes I catch these like Freudian slips in our presentations as I'm reviewing a geologist presentation for our Energy Resources Council or someone, and the Laramide keeps popping up instead of Laramie. Mm-hmm. And so that is my tie to that word.
So I don't know if it's named after the town or the person who the town is named after, but Laramide, Laramie. So, yeah.
Okay, so obviously working here at the School of Energy Resources, you are part of this incredible team of expertise at the university. And like you said, working with EORI, the State Geologic Survey, Petroleum Association of Wyoming. Is there anything else that surprised you about coming to work here that you're enjoying?
So one of the main reasons I wanted to come back to a university after industry was so that I could work with students. Mm-hmm. And that is not surprising me that I really enjoy working with the students. I wasn't so sure about the faculty because I've been around faculty a lot, and if you've been around faculty a lot, they're just like other people. Some of them are super nice and some of them are less so, but every single one of them here at the University of Wyoming has been great.
That's good.
I've super enjoyed working with every one of them I've met, and it makes sense because the whole kind of style of Wyoming is much more laid back than a lot of other places. Mm-hmm. And if you come to work here and you're here for any amount of time, that's going to rub off on you. And, just everybody's super nice here. That's not, I guess that's not surprising, but I just love the faculty members that I've worked with, and they're all super, super cool.
Yeah, we have some really great ones.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the projects you're doing with those faculty members. So first, of course, we'll start with the Mowry projects. It's kind of our flagship oil and gas project. Yeah. It's a really unique approach to advancing energy research here at the university. So let's start about talking just like what is the project and how it was developed, and let's start there.
Yeah, sure. So it actually started before I came here. So I came here in June of last year, and this was a project that had started a year prior to that. And it's really the brainchild of Scott Quillinan. Mm-hmm. And what Scott did was he looked at the state of Wyoming and kind of stepped back and said where we are and what's next for the state.
For oil and gas specifically.
For oil and gas specifically. I mean, Scott does that for
everything.
Yeah. But specifically for oil and gas, he looked at it and he said, well, we have the Mowry Shale that is a relatively unexploited resource as far as oil and gas production, but there's a lot of resource there. So the USGS published analysis of it in 2009, I think, that said there's 300 million barrels of oil in there, oil and gas equivalent. And that's a lot of oil and gas that can generate a lot of revenue for the state and for the companies that work it. And 300 million barrels of oil and gas equivalent might be a low estimate. So that's something that we have on our plans to reevaluate. And so with that much oil and gas there, it makes a lot of sense to go after it. So then the question becomes, well, why haven't people gone after it before? And the answer to that is because there's been easier stuff to go after, right? And the Mowry as a rock presents a really significant challenge too, as far as completing it. It's a really brittle rock. It has a lot of quartz, cements, but it also has layers of really thick clay, which are called bentonites, that makes drilling extraordinarily difficult. And so it's not an easy resource to extract in the Mowry. So the project was built to better do that, right? To give our industry partners a better avenue to extract it. And so the second reason for doing it is to build expertise at the University of Wyoming to do oil and gas research. And so the project, which was state funded, and I don't remember exactly who funded it, like whether it was WEA or the
it was an appropriation. Okay. The governor's office and the legislature both supported it.
Yeah. So they gave us, I think $2.5 million over the first 3 years. And so we've stood up 13 projects in 6 different departments. So we're dealing with not only the geology and the energy and petroleum engineering departments, but also chemical engineering, civil and architectural engineering, and we're also looking at the I always say that wrong, the economics of it, because if you're not ultimately making money, then nobody's going to want to do it. And so we also have to demonstrate that we're able to do it in an efficient and economic manner.
I think you've made a great point. I mean, the fact that $2.5 million supports that many projects. And what I think is so cool about the Maui project is just watching folks with all these different backgrounds work on the same general resource that is a Wyoming resource. And the meeting you ran, which I was incredibly impressed by, there was just a little internal meeting where we had students and faculty and research staff all kind of talking about their research in a single room. It was interesting because you had like mechanical engineers and civil engineers and geologists and petroleum engineers and chemical engineers all in the same room, and they come at different problems related to Maui, but they also come from different perspectives. Yep. And I just really feel like that's where innovation can happen.
It's super important because, you know, if you're a geologist and you're an academic geologist, then you tend to specialize.
Of course, yeah.
And, you know, there's faculty members that are really good at being, you know, broad researchers, but the tendency is to specialize. And the tendency is to focus on the thing that you're super interested in. And getting that outside perspective, and this is why I love multidisciplinary research so much, is it because, you know, you have this wealth and depth of experience, and to get the other perspective, you saw this, well, I see this in a little bit different way, and then that just opens up a whole lot of creativity. That's what I've seen from the faculty here when they work together. It just flows.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
So talk about some of the areas of strength that we have here at the University of Wyoming, especially like specific to oil and gas.
Yeah, sure. When I came here from industry, you have the kind of this industry mindset where you're looking at things the way that a company would. So you have certain things that you have to do before you can produce oil out of well. You have to characterize and define the well. You have to drill and complete it, then you have to extract it, and then you have to work on the economics. And so when I saw the Maui project, the projects that had been set up before I got here really fit into those 4 buckets. And so we have a really great way of characterizing and defining the rocks. We have a wealth of experience in that aspect of it. And then we have one of the best drilling and completions groups that I've seen, where we have people specifically focused on how we drill wells. And one of the great things we have here at the University of Wyoming is the drill simulator.
Sure.
Right? So we're training students not only on the science of drilling, but also the practical aspects of it. And then from production and fluid flow, you know, our chemical engineering and petroleum engineering departments are really stepping up the efforts to look at how fluids flow, especially in small pores, and how they change state in small pores, which, you know, the Maui has a small pore structure and a small pore system. So we need to know not only how we're going to frack a well, but also how that fluid is going to change as we draw pressure down. And then we're working with the economics department and one of our researchers here at SER on the economics of it, and they're about to publish a couple of papers with a brand new decline curve analysis that nobody has looked at before. And so, you know, I don't think there's any one thing that stands out above the others. I think that our strength right now is looking at kind of that full value chain that, I mean, other universities do that as well, but I don't think that they incorporate the economics as much as we've been doing. And so I think our strength right now is looking at kind of that full value chain so that we can be efficient at every step of the process.
So where do you think the Maui project is going to go next?
So it's one thing to build research projects in a vacuum, which, you know, we haven't done that, but what is really important is interacting with our industry partners in the state. We can do all the research we want on topics that we find interesting, and the industry can come say to us, oh, yeah, we're not that interested in what you're doing. And that doesn't, I mean, that's fine for us because we can still publish and do the work, and, maybe somebody might be interested in it later. But what we really want to do is talk to the people who are producing in the state, get their feedback on our projects and say, hey, what are we doing that you like? What are we doing that is not as interesting to you? What do we need to be doing that is going to help you get the best bang for your buck in the Maui and the rest of Wyoming? Because the other thing that we're doing with this Maui project is we're building workflows that are applicable to every rock type and every basin. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to go do a project on the Maui Shale and then kind of forget everything that you did. You know, so we have that institutional knowledge. Then if people are interested in the Niobrara, we go work in the Niobrara, or if they're interested in work in the Green River Valley, go do stuff there as well. So
sure. Yeah, that's really one of the cool things about the Maui is it kind of underlies most of the state, right?
It does, yeah.
So, one of the things that in the Powder River Basin specifically that I thought was interesting about the Maui, we had Director Kropach, who's director of the Wyoming Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and he came and talked to our Energy Resources Council at a meeting, and he actually showed a picture of all the permits that have been granted for the Maui. So there is drilling and there is production, but I think the point is there's potential to be more. And we're trying to do what we can to work with producers to maybe ultimately make it more attractive to drill and produce from the Maui than other places. So can you talk about some of the economic impacts that this project could have if we are able to help increase drilling and production?
Yeah, well, you mentioned it early right there in the opening that oil and gas generates billions of dollars for the state of Wyoming. So if you have 300 million barrels of oil and gas that's extractable, that's a lot of money that will go to the state. So I mean that is how the state of Wyoming makes its revenue, right? Is through severance tax and ad valorem taxes from oil and gas production in the state, and other things,
commodities,
right? But oil and gas is definitely the largest. So, if we can just get, I don't like to talk about things in terms of step change, but if we can make incremental changes in how much more is produced, like if the ultimate recovery was going to be something like 50 million barrels, and we help make it 100 million barrels, then that's a lot more money to the state, and that benefits everybody.
Sure. I think I've heard Scott say a couple times, if there is one well that is drilled because of this project that wouldn't have been otherwise, then we've totally paid for ourselves many times over.
Yeah. So that's kind of a different thing, because what he's talking about there is the amount of investment to the university that has to come in order to make these changes that benefit the state, and that's a very small investment based on what the state might get back from it.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Sure. Okay, so based on your experience in international oil and gas exploration, what do you think some of the biggest opportunities are here in Wyoming?
So one of the great things about this state is we also have a really good program for CCUS, and that. So carbon capture, utilization, and storage.
Yep.
And one of the things that CO2 can be used for is CO2 enhanced oil recovery. And that's being done already in the state. But there's a lot more opportunity for that. There's, the Bighorn Basin has been produced a lot. The Green River Basin has been produced a lot. And so there's opportunity to go back in and use CO2 as a further extraction of oil and gas. And I know that this has been done successfully already, but I think there's a lot more opportunity for it. So working with the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute is something that's really important to kind of generate that. And I know that there's going to be opportunities for that coming up. Also, horizontal drilling is something that it's not new to the industry. It's been done for a while now, but I think there's places that, if you wanted to go back and look at recompleting an area that had primarily vertical drilling, then going back and looking at an area that had vertical drilling and now looking at it from a horizontal perspective might be useful as well.
And we have a lot of opportunities in that.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so of course we're at a university, University of Wyoming. And while the School of Energy Resources really is principally a research entity, we work so closely with faculty and staff and also students that do a lot of this research that we're supporting. So one of the things that we're able to do with this support from the state and projects like the Maui Project, but really any oil and gas program, is to have graduate students working on oil and gas research. And that's something that is, with a lack of federal funding in recent years, has really been dwindling across the U.S. But we're able to, through the Maui Project and other projects, support graduate students in quite a few different departments. So I'm curious, you came from industry. Do you think their research could how does that impact their ultimate careers and lives, and if they choose to go into the private sector?
So as an employee at Chevron, we hired graduates from University of Texas, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, LSU all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And these were people who were working on research projects that we were interested in.
Yeah.
And so I see the same thing could happen here, right? What I would like to have is a cohort of students working on Wyoming problems and then going to work for companies that are working in Wyoming.
Sure.
And so then we have University of Wyoming students who come through the university working in Wyoming basins on Wyoming projects, and then go to work for companies that work in Wyoming. Mm-hmm. That would be a really neat pipeline to have set up. And so that's another reason why I'm super keen to make sure that we have a connection with industry and are working with industry so that we can showcase the great students that we do have here. Our students are working on some really cool stuff and are more than, they're every bit the student that goes to the University of Texas is, right?
Sure.
And so I'm super excited about these students, and there's a lot of opportunity there. The thing that I'll say to the students is, you have to maintain a really open mind, right? I was a history major when I went to my first time through mm-hmm. school, and what led me here is a kind of a long story, but one of the things that I've maintained is this willingness to listen if somebody had something that they wanted me to work on, because you never know where that's going to take you. And I'm not saying do stuff that you're not interested in, because you're just going to make your life miserable.
Totally.
But, have that open mind, because I never thought I would work in oil and gas. That was never my goal. But it turns out that there was something interesting that I could do in it that I really enjoyed doing. And then if I had had a closed mind about it, I wouldn't have been able to do that.
Okay. So we get a lot of students we get some students who listen to this podcast. I think we might get parents of students who listen to this podcast. So I am going to ask you about that. So you were a history major. Talk through how you came from starting as a history major and then ended up having this technical role. Well, how did that happen?
So I joke about it a little bit because, geology is nothing but the history of deeper time, right? True. What being a history major did for me was it really taught me how to think, right? Because, and other disciplines do that as well.
Right.
But the ability to spend a lot of time reading through something and then thinking about it in a kind of really deep way just helped me think a lot. So why did I become a geologist? Well, so I was working as a sports writer in Arkansas because I just kind of needed a job, and mm-hmm. I was watching TV one day and I saw this ExxonMobil commercial where these geologists were out walking on these sand dunes. Mm-hmm. I was like, hey, I like being outside. Maybe I should be a geologist. And so I quit my job and I moved out to Arizona, and I started working there and just taking classes as a geologist, and then that kind of ended up with me being here.
Oh my gosh.
So it's kind of a crazy thing, right? So I don't actually necessarily think that following whatever it is you want to do is necessarily good career advice, but it was fun for me, so.
You definitely have to enjoy what you're doing. You have to look at if you can make a living, of course. But I had a similar experience. I was like not knowing what I wanted to do, of course, like most people when they're going into college, and started pre-med and took zoology 1. And I was like, I am not dissecting that pig. I am not doing it. And so realized pretty quickly there was like no chance that I was going to go pre-med. So
there are people, when I went to college, we had people there that were like, I'm going to be a doctor. This is what I want to do. They knew it from the day they were born almost that they wanted to go and be a doctor or be a lawyer or be a whatever. And they were singularly focused on that. And now that's what they do. Yeah. And I was not that person. I was always much more of oh, look at that shiny thing over there. Let me go see what that's doing. So, in a way that's as long as you can, channel that into something that's productive, I think it's a good quality, because then you also I think it helps with creativity as well.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that at a university setting is a great place for people who have that kind of curiosity and, spend their entire career trying to figure out what they want to be when they grow up. I think this is a good place because you can work on a lot of different things. You can kind of chart your own course.
That's right.
So, but okay. So, I have to go back to the comment. You were a sports writer?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So in full disclosure, we got help with these questions, and Dr. Fred McLaughlin, your boss, put this one in. So you're a big football fan.
Yeah, I am.
And you're a big Kansas City Chiefs fan.
That's right.
And he wanted me to ask you, is it possible you've had unknown exposure to damaging chemicals while working in labs due to your sheer excitement around the Chiefs?
So I see. So that's why I'm a Chiefs fan, because
that's what your boss thinks. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that's a certainty, right? Because I'm also an X-ray scientist in graduate school. So I've definitely been exposed to some chemicals and some X-rays in my lab. So yeah, but I was a Chiefs fan before that, right?
Okay.
I grew up as a Chiefs fan. So I grew up in Missouri. So it's not like I'm a Chiefs fan just because they're awesome.
And they win a lot of things.
Although
sometimes they lose things.
Every once in a while.
Big things.
Pretty rare.
Yeah. Well, we won't talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but I mean, I suffered through the 90s and the 80s and the aughts with the Chiefs. So I feel like a little bit of, I get to gloat a little bit when they win, which they will again.
And they're such a fun team.
They are a fun team. Yeah.
So, well, we've totally diverted from our topics, but I got to ask all the questions that I'm given to ask. So for our last question, Tim, we always take a bit of a shift and try to highlight just how lucky we are to live in a state like Wyoming, or to live in Wyoming specifically, obviously. So our last question is always, what is your favorite place to visit in Wyoming?
So, even though I knew you were going to ask me this question,
don't have an answer.
I still don't have a very good answer, but here's what I'll say. So I've lived in a lot of different places in my years, and I've been to every state except for North Dakota and Alaska.
What?
Yeah, North Dakota.
How have you not been to North Dakota?
I just never happened for me.
That's weird.
So North Dakota and Alaska are the only two states I've never been to. And I've lived in rural areas, and I've lived in the downtown of a major U.S. city. And the one thing that I take from that is there's beauty to be found everywhere. And, you have to kind of find that beauty wherever you are. And so when I drive across the state of Wyoming, it's kind of all beautiful to me. I mean, it really is. I love one of my favorite things is to drive over kind of a pass and then look at a valley spread out below me. And, I get to do that often driving, that's everywhere in Wyoming. You get to see that. And then I love landscapes from, a bright, sunny summer day where, you have the trees blooming and flowers blooming versus even the cold wintry landscape. I drove up to Cody in October, and it was like, I thought I was in Antarctica.
I remember that.
But it was like super beautiful, and like you just got to find that beauty is kind of in every landscape that you look at. And, Wyoming is large enough that it has all different types of things that you can look at, so I from the prairies to the east to the Tetons and, Yellowstone. I mean, it's all pretty cool. So yeah. Okay, I'm happy to be here. Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you joining our team and being part of it and helping us to support the state and work with all the great folks here. So thank you so much for all you do for us here at the School of Energy Resources and for the state of Wyoming and for our oil and gas industry. And thanks for doing the podcast.
Thanks, Holly. Go Pokes.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape, the podcast that highlights the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. You can expect a new episode of Energy Frontier every other Wednesday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. See you next time.